election process today, and this is a little more complicated. It involves a lot more money than congressional elections. So try to bear with me because this can swirl your brain a little bit. To run for president of the United States, you can declare yourself a candidate for your political party. Okay? It's wide open for people who want to declare themselves a candidate. But the process to get your party's nomination is difficult because remember, when we're running like in 2016, there was no returning president. Obama had finished up his second term, and Democrats had a field of candidates. Republicans had a field of candidates, and each one was fighting for their party's nomination. So, like in 2016, you had Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, and a few other, like three or four other kind of lower-ranking Democrats who were all fighting for the Democratic's nomination. In the Republican or on the Republican side, you had Donald Trump, you had Jeb Bush, you had Marco Rubio, you had Carly Fiorina. There were a number of Republicans who were all vying to get the Republican Party nomination. Okay? Now let's talk about that in general. Now, the nomination process, remember, each party doesn't officially nominate their candidate until the party convention in the summer. Like this past summer, you had Joe Biden receive the Democratic Party nomination from the convention. Donald Trump got his party's nomination from the convention. That's where it officially happens. The delegates, the delegates at each convention officially choose the party's nominee for president. Well, how do those delegates at the convention know who to select? All right, and the answer is they're looking at the primary elections and the caucuses to determine that. Okay, and I want to give you an example. This is how the 2020 primary process went for the Democrats. This map's going to show you the Democratic contests for primaries. Now, one of the things you can see if you look at this little graph here, and it gives you a color code as well, that not all the primary elections for each state are going to take place on the same day. Primary elections and caucuses for presidential nominees are spread out throughout the year. Like the primary season for presidential primaries goes from typically late January all the way until June. So it is a long, drawn-out process. And the reason we don't all just go vote for our presidential primary on the same day is that you want to give people a chance to get to know all the candidates there. All right? So here's how it goes. You can see that each state on here has a certain number of delegates that it's going to send to the national convention. If you look at West Virginia, we had 24 delegates that we were sending to the Democratic National Convention. Now, those delegates, they are going to determine who West Virginia, like who we're going to select in terms of the Democratic nominee, okay? And don't get this confused. This is not the Electoral College, all right? So don't worry about that. Keep that out of your mind right now, okay? So all these states get to send delegates to the National Party Convention and have a say in who the nominee is, all right? And you can see, obviously, look over at California. They're going to send 416 delegates to the Democratic National Convention. They're obviously a little bit bigger of a deal than West Virginia, especially when it comes to the Democrats. Now, the delegates that are going to the National Convention, when they go to the National Convention, they know how to vote based on what their state's primary tells them to do. All right? And here's how that works, okay? Every state, almost every state, at least on the Democratic side, they use a proportional system to award delegates. So, for example, in West Virginia, since there's only 24 delegates, let's say in the Democratic primary that 60% of the Democrats here in West Virginia voted for Joe Biden, right? He would get 60% of those delegates to vote for him at the National Party Convention, right? So out of 24, ballpark, 60% is going to be like what, 14, all right? So 14 of those delegates from West Virginia that go to the National Democratic Convention would be what we call pledged delegates, meaning they are pledged to vote for Joe Biden. Okay, and let's say the other 40% just went to, just some random Joe Schmo. Okay, now it's like I even forget who they were. Let's say they go to Bernie Sanders because Bernie's pretty popular here. All right. Well, Bernie Sanders would get the other 10 delegates from West Virginia. So he would get still awarded something for winning some votes in West Virginia. All right. But Biden would get 14 delegates at the national convention who are pledged to vote for him. We call them pledged delegates. Okay. So every state does that. And at the national convention, when they all gather at the national convention, they are going to cast their votes for the delegate that their state told them to, or their nominee. And so when we get to the national convention in the summertime, West Virginia would have 14 people who would stand up and say, we pledge our votes to Joe Biden. And we would have 10 people who would say, we pledge our votes to Bernie Sanders. All right? That's how Democrats run their state delegates to the National Party Convention. And at the National Convention, when these delegates are all going to cast their votes, you need a majority of those delegates to decide who the nominee is going to be. Okay? So once you're at the National Convention and Democrats have something like, it's like almost 4,000 delegates at the National Convention. And so out of those 4,000 delegates, you're going to need about 2,000 of them to win. And you know ahead of time who's going to win, okay? Typically what's going to happen, remember, we know the results of the primaries along the way, and usually by March, somebody's accumulated enough pledged delegates in order to win the nomination, okay? And we'll talk about the tactics here for candidates, in just a second. So I'm sorry for going out of order on the outline. Now, let me show you what happened in 2016. I've got a website, the New York Times from 2016. Here's the way it operated in 2016. You had Hillary Clinton. You can see that she earned the amount of delegates to win, but let's take a look at the results here on the Democratic side. You had Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders were the two main candidates, and they racked up. You can see Hillary got more pledged delegates than him. We'll talk about the ones who were unpledged in a second. But, for example, in Iowa, in 2016, the Iowa results, you had Hillary Clinton winning. She won the state, but she barely won the Iowa caucuses. She got 23 of their delegates, their pledged delegates, and Bernie Sanders got 21, right? Then you go to New Hampshire, and you saw that Bernie Sanders was more popular there. And you can see the dates on these as well along the path here, okay? And that it's tight. It's pretty neck and neck, all right? Now, remember, you need a majority of the delegates to win. But out of the delegates at the convention, and here's what's really, really important, out of all those delegates, okay, most of them are pledged delegates, meaning they're pledged to vote for the candidate their state tells them to. But some of these delegates at the national convention are not obligated to do what their state tells them to, right? Democrats call these super delegates, right? Republicans just call them unpledged delegates, right? But you can see right here that Hillary Clinton in 2016, she racked up 2,220 pledged delegates from the primaries. Bernie Sanders got just a little over 1,800. But what puts Hillary Clinton over the top is getting 591 of what these are called superdelegates. All right? These superdelegates or unpledged delegates, these are people who are party elite members, the people who are higher up in the Democratic or Republican Party, and they get to have a say in who the party's nominee is going to be. For example, in West Virginia, Joe Manchin, our United States Senator, he is a superdelegate at the Democratic Convention. He gets some say-so over who the nominee was going to be. In 2016, he very early on told people that as a superdelegate, he would be supporting Hillary Clinton as the Democratic nominee. Now, you can see, though, what is concerning is that these superdelegates, they are what pushed Hillary Clinton over the top. If you look right here, she didn't get, like, you needed 2,383 delegates to win the nomination. And she didn't hit that mark just on pledged delegates, right? She needed the help of superdelegates. And people said, look, This is really, the party elites are what gave her the victory. It was pretty neck and neck. Maybe we should find a better way to decide this, right? And if you look along the way, that Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders are both winning various states and winning pledged delegates. Now, something else that's really relevant here too. Republicans were worried they were going to have the same problem here because early on you had Trump, you had Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, and Ohio Governor John Kasich, who all seemed a little bit popular, right? And nobody really expected Donald Trump to start to pull away with this, but you can see that he's going to get a lot of the, Republicans don't use many unpledged delegates. All right, so Trump had more than enough of these to win the nomination without the unpledged delegates. But early on, it looked like it was going to be a four-way race, and Donald Trump just pulled away with it. All right, now go back really quickly to the outline here. Okay, so look, all throughout from January till June, you've got this process going on where every state is voting in their primary election or their caucus, and when they vote in their primary election or their caucus, right, they're telling their delegates what to do. So, for example, Iowa here was telling out of their 46 delegates they had in 2016, 23 of them were pledged to vote for Hillary Clinton at the national convention, and 21 of them were pledged to vote for Bernie Sanders. Right? To be one of these delegates, you usually have to be a loyal party member in the state. And they determine the number of delegates that your state gets by a formula. Let me go back to this for a second, too. What they do is they look at how your state voted in previous elections. Did you vote for Democrats for president? Do you have Democratic senators, Democratic congressmen? What's your population of your state? They use a lot of factors to figure out how many delegates your state's going to get. Okay? So bear with me now. We're going through a lot. Now, for candidates who want to win the nomination of their party, there's certain things they have to do. One, when you're in the primaries, you have to appeal to your party's base, like the congressional candidates did. So if you're a Democrat, you got to focus on liberal policies and appealing to liberals. If you're a Republican, you got to work on appealing to the conservative crowd, right? You kind of have to cater to them. Now, even though you have to kind of cater to them, there's some other tactics you want to take in mind. Okay, first of all, Iowa and New Hampshire, those two states are critical to get off to a good start. Iowa and New Hampshire are always the first caucus and the first primary. All right, number one, it's part of tradition. Okay, and we'll talk about that later on too. But in Iowa and New Hampshire, you want to win one of those early states to get yourself some momentum. Okay, part of this is perception. If you win, like for example, for Donald Trump to win one of these early two states, it gives him legitimacy and it tells all these other states, hey, maybe you should consider this candidate. All right? You want to be able to win. For example, what if Donald Trump, like let's say you see he did well in Iowa too, but what if in New Hampshire and Iowa he finishes dead last and he doesn't get any pledged delegates in those states? That tells the other states that this guy's not really a contender, he's a pretender. All right? Iowa and New Hampshire are seen as like a kind of a litmus test for how a candidate's going to be able to do in the future. And you see after these first few states, especially Iowa and New Hampshire, a lot of people drop out. Look, the Republican field, it's narrowed down to 4 people here. They're the only ones that won any pledged delegates, and that's because after Iowa and New Hampshire, you had like 10 candidates drop out because they realized they didn't have any support, right? And if you don't get momentum from these early two states, you don't get money either. Nobody wants to donate to a loser. Now, Iowa and New Hampshire, okay? Going first on the primary calendar is super important because you get all the media attention and you get money spent there. Think of how much money is spent on media ad buys in Iowa and New Hampshire because candidates know it's critical to get off to a good start. Okay? Well, who gets to decide when and why Iowa and New Hampshire get all the good stuff? And by the way, think of locally what else happens too. When the media comes to your town or to your city and you got candidates, you got all these famous candidates crisscrossing your state trying to appeal to voters, and People have to buy hotel rooms to stay in for themselves, their entourage. The media have to buy hotel rooms to stay there. People are eating at your restaurants. They're buying goods and services at your particular place. They're spending tens of millions of dollars in your state. And that's a good boost for your economy. Okay? Now, also, too, look, Iowa is up here. Where's West Virginia? March? No. April? No. Look at this. We're May the 10th. All right? Look, if you're a Republican and you voted in West Virginia in the Republican primary, okay, it was meaningless. Donald Trump had already he'd already racked up enough pledged delegates to where we knew he was going to win West Virginia, not only West Virginia, but he was going to win the national election too. Now, on the Democrat side of things, at that point, it was still up in the air. But by the time it gets to West Virginia, do you think that Donald Trump or other Republican candidates were coming to West Virginia? We didn't get the media attention. We didn't get the money spent here. It's a little disappointing. All right, fun fact. States can set their primary calendar whenever they want. So if West Virginia wanted to, we could set our primary election on February 9th, just like New Hampshire. And why don't we do that? Because here's what the parties have done. If a state moves up its primary without the party's blessing or permission, they will not seat your candidates at the national convention. So for West Virginia, go back down to May here. For West Virginia, they would have refused to seat West Virginia's 31 Republican candidates if we moved up our primary without permission. Or for the Democrats in 2016, we had 29, and they would have said, hey, we won't seat your delegates at the national convention, which means your state's primaries won't matter. All right? So states don't do that, but they try to get their primary moved up so they're more important. All right? And when you try to move up your state's primaries, it's what we call front loading, and that's a term you want to be familiar with. Front loading, when your state tries to move up its primary so that it's more important. Like if West Virginia were here on February 9th with New Hampshire, then we would get media attention as well. Right? Fun fact, Iowa and New Hampshire, about half of all the media ad purchases that happen in the primary season, half of them go to those two states. All right? And it's tradition. All right? But by the way, do you think Iowa and New Hampshire want this to change? Not at all. Not at all. Okay? And so the primary season goes on for quite some time. Now, you see right here, one of the things you see is that Republicans and Democrats both have a number of primaries and caucuses that happen usually on a Tuesday in March that they call Super Tuesday. Right? And on Super Tuesday, you start to see one candidate emerge as more popular than the others. And you can see that Super Tuesday, on the Republican side, Donald Trump started to put some distance between himself and the other candidates. Now, on the Democratic side, it was a little bit trickier. The Super Tuesday was kind of a mixed bag. Although you do see that after that, it was clear that Hillary and Bernie were the only candidates who were going to be able to do anything. Okay? And Super Tuesday is where you separate the real candidates from all the others, and you see more people drop out. Now, as the primaries go on, it'll winnow down the field even more. Okay? So, you've got primaries all throughout the season. Here's February. This was 2020. February, you had Super Tuesday late in February this year. March, you had a number of, and see each state, they tell you the number of contests that are taking place, the percentage of delegates, and overall. So you can see that, like for the Democrats, by the end of March, you had 2/3 of delegates who were already going to be pledged to a particular candidate, right? And so, West Virginia here in May, I mean, obviously this was a problem for us because by this point, it's already a decided race. All right. Would we like to see our primary moved up? Yeah, that would be great. All right. Screw Iowa and New Hampshire. Why are they important? Right? They don't even go here. Sorry, Mean Girls references, they always work. All right. So the nomination process, it goes on throughout the like from January all the way until June, and you're trying to rack up as many pledged delegates as possible. The super delegates can have an impact. Usually they don't. Usually a candidate gets enough pledged delegates to where they're going to have enough pledged delegates to win the nomination. Okay. This is a process that takes a little bit for people to understand, and a lot of folks would like to see changes to it because it's kind of convoluted and weird. All right. And you can see the delegates here too, that early on in February in 2016, there were only 155 delegates up for grabs. But after Super Tuesday, more delegates were up for grabs. You can see that throughout the month of March, and the percentage of delegates, by the end of February, we had a pretty good idea of how the Democratic primary was going to go in 2020. All right. Obviously, for the Republicans, it didn't matter as much because they knew Donald Trump was going to be their nominee. Nobody wanted to challenge Trump in a primary. All right. So the nomination process takes place over a long period, and it's not till they get to the National Party Convention that those delegates officially cast their vote. Okay. This is all we're going through on the outline today because it's a lot. We'll pick up with the rest of what happens at the party convention and how the presidential elections play out.